silence settled over orbital shipyard 1, not the silence of uncertainty, the silence of awe. Beyond the panoramic observation windows, the UTC Unity hung motionless against the black canvas of space. For 9 months, she had been a construction project, a skeleton of steel and hope. Now she was a warship, not a weapon built for conquest, a promise, a declaration that humanity would never again face the unknown unprepared. No one inside the observation deck seemed eager to leave. World leaders stood beside welders. Marines exchanged quiet conversations with scientists. Engineers who had worked 18-hour shifts simply stared at the ship they had helped create. For just a few minutes, politics disappeared. They were simply human. The docking clamps securing the unfamiliar emerald vessel echoed through the station. Every conversation stopped. President Eleanor Hayes stood beside Ambassador Talon, General Hale, Marshal Daniel Mercer, and Ambassador Evelyn Shaw as the massive airlock cycled. A soft hiss escaped the seals. The inner door slowly slid open. No honor guard stepped forward. No military formation presented arms. This moment belonged to diplomacy. The first figure emerged with graceful confidence. She was taller than most humans, standing just over 6.5 feet, with an athletic build that carried the quiet strength of someone accustomed to movement rather than ceremony. Her skin held a warm bronze tone that caught the station lights with a subtle metallic shimmer. Long silver hair flowed over a formal emerald robe, embroidered with delicate patterns that resembled intertwined branches and stars. Her ears swept gently upward to elegant points, while brilliant emerald eyes calmly studied every face before her. She smiled, not cautiously, not nervously, warmly. She placed one hand across her chest before offering a slight bow. "I am Ambassador Lyra Vassaren of the Sylvan Commonwealth." Her voice carried a musical cadence, unlike any language humanity had ever heard, though the translator rendered each word perfectly. "It is an honor to finally meet the people of Earth." President Hayes stepped forward. "The honor is ours, Ambassador." The two women exchanged a respectful handshake. For a brief moment, neither civilization spoke. They simply observed one another. The first meeting between humanity and the Sylvan Commonwealth had begun. Ambassador Lyra slowly turned toward the immense hull of the UTC Unity. She remained silent for several seconds. Finally, she looked toward Ambassador Talon. "You were not exaggerating." Talon smiled knowingly. "I rarely do." Lyra's emerald eyes drifted back to the battleship. "It took my people nearly 20 years to build our first vessel of this size." General Hale folded his arms. "We had excellent motivation." "I can see that." There was no criticism in her voice, only genuine admiration, and perhaps a touch of human stubbornness. Several engineers laughed quietly. One proudly answered from somewhere in the crowd. More than a touch. Even Lyra laughed. The tension dissolved almost instantly. Later that afternoon, the ambassadors walked the corridors of the Unity. Mercer noticed Lyra's curiosity. She examined everything, the clean, cream-colored wall panels, the recessed lighting, the flush-mounted doors, the woven deck covering beneath their feet. There were no exposed cables, no unfinished compartments. The ship felt less like a machine and more like a home built to travel between the stars. Lyra finally stopped outside the bridge. "This is unexpected." Mercer looked toward the closed doors. "What were you expecting?" she answered honestly. "A vessel built in 9 months should feel rushed." She gently rested one hand against the bulkhead. "This feels loved." Mercer smiled. "You should meet the engineers." "I believe I would like that." Elsewhere aboard the ship, General Hale stood with President Hayes overlooking another section of the orbital yards. The Unity dominated the dry dock. Yet it was no longer alone. Construction had already begun on 3 new hulls, smaller, faster, purpose-built. Workers moved across them like ants beneath towering cranes. Hayes crossed her arms. They didn't waste any time. Hale smiled. We can't. What are they? The lead cruiser. He pointed toward the second hull. First fleet carrier. Then toward the third. Heavy destroyer. Hayes looked beyond them. Additional construction frames were already being assembled, dozens of them. Humanity had crossed a threshold. There would be no turning back. Far beyond the completed shipyards, separated by nearly 100 kilometers of empty space, thousands of construction drones moved around something hidden beneath enormous fabrication scaffolds. Only fragments of its framework were visible, steel beams stretched into darkness before disappearing beneath armored construction shells. It was impossible to determine its true size. Even from this distance, it dwarfed everything around it. Lyra noticed it first. She pointed through the observation window. What is that? General Hale followed her gaze. For the first time that day, he smiled without answering immediately. That is tomorrow. The ambassadors exchanged curious glances. What class of vessel is it? Lyra asked. Hale looked back toward the distant framework. It isn't. She tilted her head. I don't understand. We haven't decided what to call it yet. He folded his hands behind his back. It's still in the design phase. Lyra stared at the distant skeleton. Even unfinished, it was immense. She looked back toward the Unity, then toward the hidden framework. You intend to build something larger than your flagship. General Hale's expression became thoughtful. We sincerely hope we never need to finish it. Far behind them, welding torches flashed against the distant framework like tiny stars. No one noticed the chief shipyard engineer quietly smiling to himself. He already had a name written on the first page of the classified project folder. Project Leviathan. The bridge of the UTC Unity was quiet. Not because it was empty, because every person inside understood they were standing on the bridge of the most important ship humanity had ever built. Floor-to-ceiling displays wrapped around the forward section of the command deck. Beyond them, Earth slowly rotated beneath the ship. Blue oceans, white clouds, the home of every human being. The holographic projector illuminated. Earth disappeared. The surrounding star systems took its place. Hundreds of stars filled the room, some familiar, most completely unknown. Talon stepped forward. My friends, allow me to officially welcome humanity to the Galactic Assembly. He touched the display. Dozens of stars illuminated, trade routes, member worlds, research stations, exploration sectors. The map continued expanding. Human space barely occupied one corner. Lyra quietly watched the human officers studying the display. Most wore expressions of excitement. A few looked overwhelmed. She understood why. The galaxy had just become unimaginably larger. Talon enlarged another section of the map. Colored borders slowly appeared. The Galactic Assembly governs approximately 1,200 inhabited systems. Several officers exchanged surprised looks. 1,200! One engineer whispered. Talon smiled. It sounds impressive. His expression slowly became more serious. It is also very small. The room became silent. What do you mean? Captain Reyes asked. Talon looked toward the edge of the projection. Beyond assembly territory, the map simply stopped. We know what lies here. He pointed toward assembly space. He then gestured toward the surrounding darkness. We know very little about what lies beyond. The stars faded into black, unknown, unexplored, unmapped. Humanity suddenly realized something. The galaxy was still mostly a mystery. General Hale folded his arms. So where do we begin? Lyra smiled warmly. By learning. She looked around the room. You have built remarkable ships. You have united your people. You have shown great courage." She paused. "Now, learn patience." Mercer smiled quietly. "I have a feeling that's going to be the hardest part." Several people laughed, even Talon. "Marshal, you have absolutely no idea." The galaxy was still mostly a mystery. General Hale folded his arms. "So where do we begin?" Lyra smiled warmly. "By learning." She looked around the room. "You have built remarkable ships. You have united your people. You have shown great courage." She paused. "Now learn patience." Mercer smiled quietly. "I have a feeling that's going to be the hardest part." Several people laughed, even Talon. "Marshal, you have absolutely no idea." Beyond the observation windows, the UTC Unity slowly rotated toward the stars. For the first time, humanity possessed not only the means to leave home, but a destination. The briefing ended nearly 2 hours later. By then, the star map had expanded across the walls, the ceiling, and the polished surface of the central table. Trade routes glowed in pale blue. Assembly systems burned gold. Uncharted regions remained black. Humanity's home occupied one tiny point near the edge of everything. Captain Amelia Reyes stood beside the display, studying the scale of it. 1,200 inhabited systems, dozens of civilizations, borders shaped by wars, treaties, migrations, and disputes that had begun before humanity learned to cross its own oceans. The Unity suddenly felt much smaller. Ambassador Talon noticed her expression. "Overwhelming?" Reyes looked toward him. "A little." He smiled. "That is a healthy response." Marshal Mercer remained near the opposite side of the table. "What's the unhealthy response?" "Believing you understand it." Mercer gave a quiet laugh. "Then we should be safe for a while." Ambassador Lyra looked between them. "You make uncertainty sound comforting." "No," Mercer said, "just honest." General Hale closed the final briefing file. "Honesty is useful." He looked toward the assembled officers. "So is preparation." The room quieted. Hale touched the display. The map vanished. In its place appeared the UTC Unity. Then another vessel materialized beside her, smaller, narrower, built around speed and long-range sensors. A cruiser. A third vessel appeared. Then a fourth. A destroyer, a carrier, a frigate, a tanker, a hospital ship, a repair vessel. More followed until a complete formation hung above the table. Humanity's first true fleet. Reyes folded her arms. "How much of this exists?" "The Unity," Hale answered. "That's it?" "For the moment." Several officers exchanged looks. Hale continued before anyone could respond. "The shipyards have already begun laying down additional hulls." The hologram shifted. Orbital yards appeared around Earth and Luna. Construction frames multiplied across the display. 3 cruisers, 6 destroyers, 8 frigates, 2 fleet carriers, 4 logistics vessels, 1 hospital ship, and more than 200 strike craft across 4 planned variants. Captain Reyes studied the numbers. "That isn't a fleet." "Not yet." Hale enlarged the first carrier. "It will be." The carrier was long and broad, built around armored internal hangars and multiple launch corridors. Reyes leaned closer. "Fighter capacity." 120 under normal deployment." A naval aviation officer answered from the far side of the room. "Up to 160 if the support bays are converted." Mercer looked toward the display. "That sounds crowded." "It will be." The officer changed the projection. 4 strike craft appeared. A compact interceptor, a heavier multi-role fighter, a broad-winged bomber, a long-range reconnaissance craft. The interceptor is designed for fleet defense and space superiority. The first craft rotated. The multi-role fighter can operate from carriers, planetary bases, or temporary expeditionary fields. The second moved forward. The heavy strike platform carries anti-ship ordnance. The bomber appeared, and the reconnaissance variant prioritizes endurance, sensor range, and electronic warfare. Mercer studied the silhouettes. Human pilots! For now. Lyra looked toward the officer. You intend to automate them? Eventually, some missions. Hale answered before the officer could. Not command decisions? The Sylvan ambassador nodded slowly. That distinction matters. It does to us. Reyes looked toward the carriers again. When do they launch? The first carrier should leave dry dock in 5 months. The cruisers? 4. The destroyers? 3. Reyes glanced toward the Unity. So until then, this ship is the fleet. Hale met her eyes. Yes. The answer settled heavily across the room. The Unity was powerful, but she was one ship. One engine failure, one weapons malfunction, one mistake away from leaving humanity without an interstellar flagship. Reyes looked back toward the proposed formation. Then we do not send her anywhere alone. Talon raised an eyebrow. You have no other interstellar warships. Not yet. She pointed toward the support vessels. We use what we have. Orbital cutters, survey craft, fuel tenders, existing military transports, anything capable of maintaining formation and carrying emergency supplies. Hale nodded. That is already being considered. It should be more than considered. Reyes looked around the table. The Unity may be the most advanced ship humanity has ever built, but she is still a ship. Ships break. Crews make mistakes. Space does not care how historic the mission is. General Hale watched her for a moment, then smiled. That is exactly why you have the chair. Below them, squads moved through a full-scale boarding course. Bulkheads opened and closed at random. Artificial gravity shifted without warning. Red lights strobed through smoke. Marines advanced through it in teams. No 2 uniforms were exactly alike yet. Some still carried national patterns. Others wore the new dark armor of the Terran Expeditionary Marines. The organization had been created. Its identity was still being forged. Mercer joined Hale at the glass. You wanted to see me? Hale nodded toward the training floor. How are they progressing? Fast. That good? That necessary. Below them, one team reached a sealed hatch. A breaching charge flashed. The door folded inward. The Marines entered before the smoke cleared. Mercer watched every movement. They are learning to stop thinking like separate units. How long until they're ready? For what? Hale glanced toward him. First deployment. Mercer did not answer immediately. That depends on the deployment. Diplomatic escort. Ready now. Boarding operation. 2 months. Hostile planetary insertion. Longer. And something worse. Mercer looked at him. Define worse? Hale smiled faintly. That is what I was afraid you'd say. He touched a control on the railing. The training floor disappeared behind an opaque privacy screen. A classified emblem appeared on the glass, a downward-pointing spear surrounded by a broken ring. Mercer studied it. What am I looking at? A proposal. The emblem faded. A powered armor system replaced it, not a soldier wearing additional plating, a machine built around a marine. The suit stood more than 7 feet tall. Heavy armor covered the chest, shoulders, thighs, and forearms. The helmet was narrow and angular, its faceplate completely sealed. Thruster housings sat along the back and calves. Magnetic anchors lined the boots. The hands were large enough to crush reinforced steel. Mercer stepped closer. How far along? 3 functioning prototypes. And how many broken ones? 11. That sounds about right. Hale changed the image. The armor separated into layers: powered frame, reactor unit, life support shell, armor plating, sensor package, integrated tactical systems. Vacuum capable, radiation shielded, chemical and biological sealed. Enough strength amplification to carry crew-served weapons without a team. micro-thrusters for zero-gravity maneuvering, internal medical monitoring, manual controls backed by predictive movement assistance. Mercer studied the helmet. No autonomous combat decisions. None. Good. Hale enlarged the armor's power core. The engineers believe a trained operator could remain active for 36 hours. Mercer looked toward him. Believe? They want Marines to test it. Of course they do. Hale allowed himself a small smile. We are forming a specialized detachment. Mercer looked back at the armor. How many? 40 operators initially. Selection standards? You set them. Command? You appoint it. Mission? Hale's expression changed. Everything we cannot reasonably ask anyone else to do. The words hung between them. Boarding crippled warships, operating in hard vacuum, entering irradiated compartments, holding corridors against overwhelming numbers, rescuing crews from environments that would kill an unprotected Marine in seconds. Mercer studied the suit again. What are they calling it? The armor program? The detachment. Hale brought the emblem back onto the glass. Vanguard. Mercer considered the name. Below them, hidden behind the privacy screen, Marines continued training. Ordinary men and women preparing for extraordinary missions. The Vanguard would be something else. Not superior Marines, not separate from the Corps. The Marines sent when courage alone was not enough. Mercer looked toward Hale. They do not become heroes because they wear the suit. No. They earn the suit because they already proved who they are. Hale nodded. Agreed. Mercer looked once more at the emblem. Then we begin selection tomorrow. Captain Reyes spent the same afternoon walking the Unity alone. Not because she wanted privacy, because she needed to know the ship without an audience. She began at the bridge, then moved through engineering, reactor control, damage control, medical, flight operations, crew quarters, hydroponics, machine shops, emergency shelters. Every compartment told her something. The Unity had been built quickly, but not carelessly. The corridors were clean and finished. Cream-colored wall panels broke up the darker structural ribs. Recessed lighting filled each passage with an even white glow. Flush doors opened silently as she approached. Dark woven deck covering softened the sound of her boots. The ship did not feel industrial. It felt deliberate, human, built for people who might live aboard her for years. She stopped outside the main observation gallery. Earth filled the windows. Captain Reyes stood there for a long time. You were difficult to find. She recognized the voice before turning. Ambassador Lyra entered the gallery. I wasn't hiding. You left 3 security officers behind. They were slowing me down. Lyra smiled. Marshal Mercer will be pleased. He'll survive. The Sylvan ambassador joined her at the window. Together, they looked down at Earth. It is beautiful, Lyra said. Reyes nodded. It is. You sound surprised. I've seen it from orbit before. But not from here. Reyes glanced at her. No. Lyra studied the planet. My people still tell stories about the first vessel that carried us beyond our home system. What happened to it? It was preserved. As a museum. As a shrine. Reyes looked toward her. Lyra gave a small shrug. We are sentimental. So are we. The captain looked down the length of the gallery. This ship will probably become a museum one day. Lyra smiled. You say that as if you intend to return it intact. I do. Is that confidence? No. Reyes looked back toward Earth. It's the job. The answer seemed to please Lyra. She rested one hand against the glass. Your people build differently than mine. How so? We build for harmony. You build for survival. Reyes looked toward the armored hull visible beyond the window frame. Is that criticism? No. Lyra's eyes remained on Earth. It is an observation. She paused. Your ship is armed more heavily than many assembly cruisers. Reyes said nothing. You have met only peaceful civilizations, Lyra continued. And yet you built the Unity as though you expected war. Captain Reyes finally looked at her. Did your people stop building weapons after meeting the Avari? Lyra smiled faintly. No. Then I think you understand. The ambassador turned back toward the planet. I do. Her voice became quieter. More than I wish I did. Reyes heard the change, not fear, memory. There were questions behind it, questions Lyra was not ready to answer. The captain did not press. They stood together in silence. A human and a Sylvan, both watching the same world, both understanding that peace was valuable precisely because it could be lost. Across the orbital yards, construction continued. Fighter frames moved down automated assembly lines. Destroyer keels took shape inside rotating docks. Carrier sections arrived from factories on Earth and Luna. Tanker hulls were fitted with transfer booms and armored fuel cells. Hospital ships received surgical suites, isolation wards, and emergency cryogenic bays. Humanity's first fleet was not appearing all at once. It was being built piece by piece, bolt by bolt, shift by shift. Far beyond the active shipyards, hidden behind military exclusion zones and classified sensor screens, Project Leviathan remained little more than a skeletal spine, 10 kilometers of planned structure. A central weapon channel extending through more than half its projected length. Most of the surrounding framework had not yet been assembled. The main rail system did not exist. The reactors that might one day power it were still theoretical. For now, it was not a ship. It was a question, one humanity hoped it would never need to answer. Inside the primary yard, the Unity's running lights illuminated one by one. Captain Reyes returned to the bridge. Marshal Mercer entered moments later. Ambassador Shaw followed with Talon and Lyra. General Hale watched from the command gallery. The bridge crew took their stations. Reyes sat in the captain's chair for the first time. The room became still. "Release docking clamps," she ordered. A control officer looked toward her. Docking clamps released. The Unity shifted almost imperceptibly. 9 months of scaffolding, cables, and construction locks fell away. For the first time since her keel had been laid, nothing held her in place. Reyes looked toward the helm. "Thrusters ahead." "How much, Captain?" She watched Earth turning beneath them. 1%. The helmsman smiled. 1% ahead. The engines responded, softly at first, then with a low vibration that passed through the deck and into every compartment. The Unity moved. No cheering, no ceremony, only a ship answering her captain. Reyes watched the distance from the yard slowly increase. Then she spoke the first order of her command. "Take us clear." Beyond the windows, the stars waited. The UTC Unity drifted silently beyond the orbital shipyards. For the first time since her keel had been laid, she was truly alone. Construction docks slowly disappeared behind her. Earth rotated peacefully below. Ahead, only the stars. The bridge remained quiet. Not from uncertainty, from discipline. Every officer was busy learning a ship no one had ever commanded before. Every console represented technology still being tested. Every checklist had been written only weeks earlier. Captain Amelia Reyes watched it all without speaking. She knew the crew was watching her just as carefully. A captain's confidence spread faster than any order. So did hesitation. She intended to give them only the first. "Status report." The requests came calmly, one after another. Navigation green. "Reactor output stable. Primary life support operating within nominal parameters. Artificial gravity holding at 1 standard Earth gravity. Point defense network online. Long-range sensors calibrated. Communications synchronized with orbital command." One station remained silent. Reyes looked toward tactical. The young lieutenant glanced up. "Weapons remain in administrative safe mode, Captain," She nodded. They'll stay that way. A few officers exchanged subtle smiles. No one aboard wanted the first discharge from humanity's flagship to happen because someone pressed the wrong button. Marshal Mercer stood near the aft of the bridge, quietly observing. He wasn't studying the displays. He was studying people. The helmsman leaned forward every few seconds. Engineering spoke in clipped, confident sentences. Communications repeated messages before transmitting them. They were all nervous. Good. Nervous people double-checked their work. Overconfident people skipped steps. Mercer preferred nervous. Several decks below, the Marine detachment was settling into its new home. Rifles were inventoried, armor racks organized, medical kits inspected for the third time. Someone was already arguing over coffee. Mercer smiled to himself. Some things never changed. The door slid open behind him. A gunnery sergeant stepped inside. "Marshal." Mercer turned. "Gunny." The older Marine looked around the compartment. "Feels strange." "It does. Never thought I'd serve on a spaceship." "You and me both." The gunny folded his arms. "So, when do we start calling it home?" Mercer looked around the compartment, the polished bulkheads, the neatly made racks, the Terran Collective emblem hanging above the ready room entrance. He smiled. "I think we just did." Elsewhere aboard the Unity, Ambassador Lyra wandered the civilian observation deck. She had politely declined another formal briefing. Instead, she wanted to meet people. A young engineer noticed her studying a maintenance panel. "Can I help you, Ambassador?" She smiled. "I hope so." She pointed toward the panel. "You built this?" The engineer laughed. "No, I just fix what smarter people build." Lyra tilted her head. "Among my people, the ones who repair things are usually considered the smartest." The engineer blinked. "I like your people." She laughed softly. "So do I." Later, Captain Reyes made one final stop before ending her inspection. Engineering, the heart of the Unity. Chief Engineer Nathan Brooks stood waiting beside the primary reactor display. "You came." "I said I would." Brooks gestured proudly around the compartment. "Welcome to the only place aboard this ship more important than your bridge." Reyes raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold statement." "It's also true." He pointed upward. "Without us, the bridge becomes very quiet." She couldn't argue with that. The chief engineer smiled. "We've spent 9 months making sure this ship works." He looked directly at her. "Now it's your job to bring her home." Reyes extended her hand. "I'll make you a deal." "I'm listening." "You keep my engines running and I'll keep your reactor out of combat." Brooks laughed. "Captain, I'll hold you to that." As the first watch came to an end, the Unity completed her initial systems trials. Every major system responded exactly as designed. No failures, no alarms, no surprises. For a ship built in only 9 months, that was almost unbelievable. Captain Reyes finally allowed herself a small smile. "Helm." "Captain." "Set course." The helmsman looked over. "For where, ma'am?" Reyes glanced toward Ambassador Talon. The Avari smiled knowingly. "I believe it's time humanity met its neighbors." Reyes nodded. "Set course for Assembly Station 1. The helmsman entered the command. "Aye, Captain." Outside, the maneuvering thrusters fired. The UTC Unity slowly turned toward a destination no human ship had ever visited. Behind her, Earth grew smaller. Ahead, the galaxy was waiting. The stars ahead slowly shifted across the forward displays. The UTC Unity had reached the outer edge of the Sol system. Behind her, Neptune drifted silently through the darkness. Ahead, nothing but open space. Captain Amelia Reyes stood from her command chair and walked to the forward windows. No human vessel had ever traveled this far under its own power. The silence on the bridge reflected the moment. History rarely announced itself. Sometimes it simply waited for someone to take the next step. Navigation. The navigator looked up. "Captain, confirm departure point. We are clear of all commercial traffic, clear of military assets, clear of orbital debris. All exclusion zones confirmed." Reyes nodded. "Engineering?" Chief Brooks's voice answered over the intercom. "Reactor stable. FTL core synchronized. Field generators holding. No anomalies." General Hale folded his arms. "That almost sounds disappointing." Brooks laughed. "I'd rather be bored than famous." Several people smiled. No engineer wanted to become famous because something exploded. Ambassador Talon stepped beside the navigation display. "The jump itself will feel unusual." Captain Reyes looked toward him. "Anything we should know?" "The first time," he smiled. "Most humans will probably stop talking." Marshal Mercer looked over. "That's encouraging. It isn't dangerous. It simply isn't something your mind has experienced before." Lyra quietly added, "The silence afterward is usually the memorable part." Mercer raised an eyebrow. "Now you're making it sound mysterious." "It is." Throughout the Unity, a shipwide announcement echoed through every compartment. "Attention all hands. This is the captain. We are preparing for humanity's first faster-than-light transit." A brief pause followed. "Secure all stations. Complete final equipment checks. And take a moment to appreciate where you are. You only get one first voyage." Across the ship, people stopped what they were doing. Some looked through nearby viewports. Others simply stood quietly. Marines gathered in small groups. Engineers exchanged nervous smiles. A young crewman pressed one hand against the nearest bulkhead, almost as if thanking the ship herself. The bridge lights dimmed slightly. A soft blue glow spread across the tactical display. The FTL drive awakened. No violent shaking, no screaming engines. Just an almost musical vibration felt more than heard. The stars outside began to stretch, not into lines, into something stranger. Space itself seemed to ripple. Captain Reyes returned to her chair. "Helm. Course confirmed. Drive standing by." She looked once around the bridge. Every officer was ready. General Hale stood silently behind her. Marshal Mercer rested one hand against the railing. Ambassador Shaw watched Earth on one of the secondary displays. Ambassadors Talon and Lyra exchanged a quiet glance. Neither spoke. They remembered their own first voyage. Reyes took one slow breath, then gave the order. "Engage!" Nothing happened. At least, that was what everyone's senses insisted. There was no sudden acceleration, no violent movement, no impact. The ship remained perfectly still, yet Earth disappeared. The stars became impossible to focus on. Colors humanity had no names for drifted beyond the hull. Distance seemed to lose meaning. Time felt different. Several bridge officers instinctively reached for nearby consoles. Not because anything was wrong, because their minds desperately wanted something familiar. Mercer quietly blinked. "I don't think my brain likes this." Talon chuckled softly. "It gets easier." "I sincerely hope so." The sensation lasted only moments, then, without warning, it ended. The stars returned, normal, silent, beautiful. Captain Reyes looked toward navigation. "Report!" The navigator stared at his display, then checked it again. Finally, he looked up. "We've arrived." A smile slowly spread across his face. "Captain, we just crossed nearly 12 light years." The bridge remained silent. No one quite knew how to react. 12 light years. A journey that would once have taken humanity thousands of years, completed in minutes. General Hale quietly spoke. "I don't think history books are going to be long enough." A few restrained laughs broke the tension. Even Mercer smiled. Ahead, a brilliant white star illuminated the darkness. Orbiting it, dozens of vessels moved in carefully organized traffic lanes. Massive orbital habitats slowly rotated. Commercial freighters, passenger liners, military escorts, scientific platforms, and stations so enormous they dwarfed anything humanity had yet constructed. The largest structure rested at the center of it all, elegant, circular, almost 20 kilometers across. Hundreds of docking arms extended outward like the petals of a flower. Ships from dozens of civilizations arrived and departed in orderly streams. Captain Reyes quietly stared at the display. Assembly Station 1. Talon nodded proudly. The crossroads of nearly half the known galaxy. Marshal Mercer looked through the forward windows. So, this is where humanity introduces itself. Lyra smiled. No. She looked toward the bustling station. This is where the galaxy meets humanity. As the UTC Unity eased toward the busiest diplomatic station ever built, thousands of eyes turned toward the newest arrival. The first Terran warship had arrived, and the galaxy had already noticed. The UTC Unity drifted slowly toward Assembly Station 1. Compared to humanity's orbital yards, the station was almost impossible to comprehend. Traffic flowed in every direction. Freighters carrying food crossed paths with diplomatic vessels adorned in brilliant colors. Massive cargo ships moved beneath elegant passenger liners. Maintenance drones worked continuously along the station's outer hull, while tugcraft carefully guided arriving vessels toward their assigned berths. There was no chaos. Only precision. Thousands of ships, millions of lives, all moving together like a perfectly rehearsed symphony. Captain Reyes quietly watched the display. How many people live here? Ambassador Talon smiled. It depends on the season. Reyes looked toward him. That's not an answer. No, it isn't. He folded his hands behind his back. Today, approximately 38 million. Silence filled the bridge. Chief Brooks looked up from engineering. That's a city, Talon chuckled. It is several cities. The traffic controller's voice arrived a few moments later. Not human, not Avari, not Sylvan. A calm, practiced voice spoken through the universal translator. Unidentified Terran vessel, welcome to Assembly Station 1. Several bridge officers exchanged smiles. They had expected suspicion. Instead, they were welcomed. Captain Reyes activated the communications channel. This is Captain Amelia Reyes of the Terran Collective flagship UTC Unity. We are honored to accept your welcome. A brief pause followed. UTC Unity, your arrival has generated considerable interest. Marshal Mercer quietly muttered, I somehow expected that. As the Unity entered the station's primary docking ring, the scale became even more unbelievable. Entire parks filled the interior of the rotating habitat. Artificial rivers wound between districts. Towering buildings reached toward the central axis. Children from species humanity had never seen played together beneath enormous transparent domes. Restaurants, markets, museums, universities, everything a civilization needed. General Hale slowly removed his glasses. I've spent my entire career preparing for war. He looked across the station. I never imagined we'd find this. Ambassador Lyra smiled warmly. Most visitors don't. The docking clamps engaged with a gentle vibration. For a moment, no one moved. Captain Reyes stood. Marshal. Mercer looked up. Captain, I believe we're making history again. Mercer smiled. We seem to be developing a habit. The airlock cycled open. This time an honor guard waited, not soldiers, representatives, dozens of them. Each wore formal clothing unique to their civilization. Some stood nearly 3 meters tall. Others barely reached Mercer's waist. Some possessed 4 arms. Others floated inside transparent environmental fields. One appeared almost crystalline, light shimmering through its body like sunlight through ice. Mercer stopped for half a second. No military briefing could have prepared anyone for this. A distinguished Avari official stepped forward. He bowed respectfully. "President Hayes, Captain Reyes, Marshal Mercer, ambassadors, welcome to Assembly Station 1, he smiled, "and welcome to the Galactic Assembly." As the Terran delegation walked through the station, conversations quietly stopped. Not from fear, curiosity. Humans, the newest civilization. Some citizens waved politely, others simply stared. Children pointed excitedly. A tiny alien with bright blue feathers tugged on its parent's sleeve. "Are those the humans?" Its parent nodded. "Yes. They're smaller than I imagined." Mercer overheard the comment. He leaned toward Reyes. "I like that we're already disappointing expectations." Reyes struggled not to laugh. The station itself seemed alive. Every corridor revealed something new. Open markets selling foods from worlds hundreds of light years apart. Artists creating sculptures from glowing minerals. Musicians playing instruments with sounds unlike anything on Earth. Engineers arguing over equations that no human yet understood. Scientists eagerly discussing discoveries across half the galaxy. Humanity had expected to enter a political organization. Instead, they had stepped into the crossroads of civilization itself. The delegation finally reached an enormous set of doors, nearly 20 meters tall, carved from a dark metallic alloy polished to a mirror finish. The Galactic Assembly emblem stretched across both doors, hundreds of stars surrounding a single spiral galaxy. President Hayes quietly looked toward Ambassador Talon. "This is it," he nodded. "Beyond these doors, the future of your civilization changes forever." The massive doors began to open. Sunlight from the station's central dome poured through the widening gap. Inside, thousands of representatives slowly turned toward the entrance. Every conversation ceased, every eye settled upon the arriving delegation. For the first time, humanity stood before the galaxy, and the galaxy stood to greet them. The chamber was unlike anything humanity had ever built. It wasn't square, it wasn't circular, it was both. Hundreds of terraces rose in gentle arcs around a vast central floor, each designed to accommodate the physical needs of a different civilization. Some platforms held flowing water, others were filled with dense vegetation. Several glowed with soft ultraviolet light invisible to the human eye. One delegation remained suspended inside a transparent atmospheric sphere. Another sat upon polished stone warmed from below. Every civilization had been given a place where they could participate as equals. President Eleanor Hayes paused for a moment. "So this is the Galactic Assembly?" Ambassador Talon smiled. "It has been for almost 800 years. The Terran delegation entered together. President Hayes, Ambassador Evelyn Shaw, Captain Amelia Reyes, Marshal Daniel Mercer, General Marcus Hale. Ambassador Lyra walked beside Talon, not as a representative of Earth, but as one of the Assembly's senior diplomats. The conversations around the chamber gradually faded, not because protocol demanded silence, because curiosity did. Every representative wanted to see the newest civilization for themselves. Some smiled warmly, others simply observed. A few remained impossible to read. Mercer quietly leaned toward General Hale. "I've never been stared at by this many aliens before." Hale kept his eyes forward. "Don't get used to it." "I'm trying not to." A clear tone echoed through the chamber. Every conversation stopped instantly. An elderly figure slowly approached the center podium. Unlike the others, no translator was needed immediately. When the universal translation activated, the voice carried quiet confidence. "Representatives of the Galactic Assembly, welcome." No applause followed. The silence itself was respect. The speaker looked around the chamber. Today, we welcome a civilization unlike any that has joined this assembly before. A holographic image of Earth appeared above the central floor. 9 months ago, the people of this world believed they were alone. The image slowly expanded. Human orbital stations, the Moon, the Unity, shipyards stretching across this lunar space. In 9 months, they united their nations. They built an interstellar fleet. They established diplomatic relations, and they chose cooperation over isolation. The speaker looked toward President Hayes. Those achievements deserve recognition. For the first time, the chamber applauded, not loudly, respectfully. President Hayes bowed her head slightly. The applause wasn't for military strength, it wasn't for technology. It was for what humanity had accomplished together. The speaker extended one hand toward the Terran delegation. President Eleanor Hayes. The floor recognizes the Terran Collective. President Hayes took a slow breath. She stepped to the podium. Looking across the chamber, she saw hundreds of faces, some familiar, most completely unknown. Every one of them represented a civilization with its own history, its own triumphs, its own scars. She smiled gently. My fellow representatives, I've rewritten this speech 6 times. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the chamber. It turns out introducing an entire civilization is harder than I expected. Even the speaker smiled. Hayes continued. For thousands of years, humanity looked into the night sky, wondering whether anyone was out there. She looked upward toward the projection of Earth. We dreamed. We imagined. We hoped. And occasionally, we feared. She let the words settle. 9 months ago, those questions were answered. She looked toward Ambassador Talon. You greeted us with friendship. Then, toward Lyra. You greeted us with trust. She looked around the assembly. Today, we offer both in return. The chamber remained silent, listening. The Terran Collective does not seek to replace what already exists. We do not seek territory. We do not seek conquest. We seek knowledge, partnership, and the chance to contribute to something greater than ourselves. She rested one hand against the podium. We are young. We know that. We have much to learn. We will make mistakes. A few representatives nodded knowingly. So did every civilization represented in this chamber. She smiled. The important part is that we intend to learn from them. When she finished, no one spoke immediately. Then one representative began applauding. Another joined, then another. Within seconds, the entire assembly rose to its feet. Marshal Mercer looked around the chamber. They're standing. General Hale quietly nodded. They are. Mercer looked toward President Hayes. I don't think she realizes it. No, Hale smiled. She's still giving the speech. The applause slowly faded. The speaker stepped forward once more. President Hayes. On behalf of the Galactic Assembly, it is my honor to recognize the Terran Collective as a full member civilization. He lifted a small crystal emblem from the podium. The crystal shimmered softly as Hayes accepted it. Its surface reflected not one world, but hundreds, a symbol that Earth no longer stood alone. As the ceremony concluded, representatives began leaving their seats. Almost immediately, several delegations changed direction, not toward the exits, toward the Terran delegation. An Avari diplomat arrived first, then a Sylvan trade minister, then a Vesta cultural envoy. Within moments, a line had formed. Captain Reyes looked at Ambassador Shaw. I thought the hard part was over. Shaw smiled. The hard part has just begun. Across the chamber, Ambassador Talon quietly watched the scene unfold. He looked toward Lyra. They're adapting faster than I expected. Lyra smiled. No. She watched humanity disappear into a crowd of new allies. They're doing what humans have always done. And what's that? She folded her hands behind her back. They're making strangers feel like neighbors. For the first time since leaving Earth, the Terran delegation no longer felt like visitors. They felt like they belonged. The applause gradually faded. Representatives slowly returned to their seats. The Speaker of the Assembly remained standing at the center of the chamber. Before we proceed with today's agenda, Ambassador Talon has requested permission to address the Assembly regarding the Terran Collective. The Speaker inclined his head. You have the floor. Talon stepped forward without hesitation. His calm expression remained unchanged, but those who had known him for years immediately noticed something different. This was not a diplomatic address. It was personal. My fellow representatives, when I first stood before the leaders of Earth 9 months ago, many of you questioned why. Several delegates shifted in their seats. No one interrupted. You believed the Avari had acted too quickly, too independently. Some even believed we had violated Assembly protocol. He paused. You were correct. A quiet murmur spread through the chamber. President Hayes glanced toward Ambassador Shaw. Neither had expected this. Talon continued. I did violate protocol. I acted without waiting for a full Assembly vote. The chamber grew still. I would make the same decision again. A delegate from the far side of the hall stood. On what authority? Talon met his gaze. On conscience. The representative frowned. That is not an answer. No. It is the only one I possess. Talon touched the central control console. A classified transmission appeared above the assembly floor. Most of the text remained heavily encrypted. Only a handful of lines had been cleared for public release. The heading read, Keth High Command, Strategic Directive. Several delegates immediately recognized the format. The chamber became noticeably quieter. A highlighted section appeared. Primitive civilization detected within Sol system. Another line illuminated. Sanitization fleet assigned upon completion of current campaign operations. No one spoke. President Hayes slowly looked toward the projection. The words were clinical, matter-of-fact, as though billions of lives were little more than another administrative task. The speaker's expression hardened. This document has been authenticated? A senior intelligence officer from the assembly rose. It has. The encryption signatures match previous Keth military directives. A low murmur swept through the chamber. General Hale clenched his jaw. Mercer remained perfectly still. Talon looked toward the Terran delegation. When this transmission was intercepted, Earth had no means of defending itself. He looked back toward the assembly. Had we waited for debate, humanity would almost certainly have been destroyed before assistance arrived. One representative spoke quietly. How was this message obtained? For the first time, Talon hesitated. His voice softened. An intelligence operative. No name followed, no rank, only silence. They infiltrated Keth military communications. They understood the risk. They transmitted this warning. He lowered his eyes. The Keth discovered the transmission. Another pause. They were captured. No one in the chamber moved. They were publicly executed 3 days later. Silence. Not diplomatic silence. The silence reserved for sacrifice. Talon looked toward President Hayes. The people of Earth never met that officer. They never knew their name. But every child who has been born on your world during these last 9 months, every ship you have launched, every future your civilization now possesses, exists because they chose to send one final message. President Hayes slowly stood. Not because protocol required it, because respect did. Without speaking, she bowed her head. One by one, representatives throughout the chamber did the same. The Sylvan delegation stood first, then the Vesta, then the Dern. Within moments, the entire Galactic Assembly stood in complete silence. The speaker finally broke it. Let the record show that on this day, the Assembly honors an unnamed servant of the Avari Republic, whose final act preserved a civilization. He lowered his head. And whose sacrifice reminds us all that courage recognizes no species. No applause followed. None was needed. The silence carried far greater weight. Only after several long moments did the speaker raise his eyes once more. The Assembly will now continue its session. But everyone present knew something had changed. Humanity was no longer simply the newest member of the Assembly. They were a civilization that had been given a future by someone who never lived to see it. The silence lingered long after the speaker resumed his seat. No delegate was eager to speak first, not after what they had just learned. Finally, an elderly representative from a world near the Keth frontier slowly rose. Unlike the others, his uniform carried visible signs of wear. Several medals had been repaired rather than replaced. One sleeve ended at an artificial arm. He looked toward the Terran delegation. "My people have lived beside the Keth frontier for almost 2 centuries. His translator spoke with a measured, gravelly tone. "We know exactly what the word sanitization means." The chamber remained silent. It is not conquest. It is not occupation. It is extermination. Several of the newer delegates shifted uneasily. The frontier representative continued. "The Keth do not invade worlds they consider beneath them. They erase them." A holographic image appeared above the assembly floor. An entire star system, 8 inhabited worlds, each marked with a date. One by one, every world faded to grey, then black. No survivors, no rebuilding, nothing. President Hayes quietly watched the final world disappear. "How many?" she asked. The representative looked at her. "How many what?" "How many civilizations?" He answered without emotion. "Confirmed?" He looked toward the Assembly Intelligence section. 34. The number echoed through the chamber. 34 civilizations. Gone. General Hale slowly folded his hands behind his back. Mercer remained expressionless. Inside, his stomach tightened. The representative looked directly at the human delegation. "You are fortunate." President Hayes met his eyes. "In what way?" "You had 9 months." A faint, weary smile crossed his face. "My people had 3 weeks." Silence returned. The difference needed no explanation. The speaker stood once more. "The Terran Collective has now been briefed on the strategic situation." He turned toward President Hayes. "By Assembly law, you are entitled to ask one unrestricted question of this chamber." The representatives quietly looked toward the human delegation. One question. No classified restrictions, no diplomatic filtering. President Hayes glanced toward Ambassador Shaw, then toward General Hale, finally toward Marshal Mercer. Mercer gave the slightest shake of his head. This wasn't a military question. It was a question for humanity. Hayes looked back to the speaker. "My question is simple." She paused. "If every civilization represented here understands the threat, why does the Keth Dominion still exist?" The chamber fell completely silent, not because anyone was offended, because everyone knew there was no simple answer. The speaker slowly exhaled. "That is the question every generation has asked." He touched the central display. The map of known space appeared once again. Assembly territory glowed blue. The Keth Dominion burned deep crimson across the opposite frontier. A line of contested systems flickered between them. The speaker gestured toward the border. "For nearly 150 years, this line has moved, sometimes toward the Assembly, sometimes toward the Keth. Entire fleets have been lost. Worlds have changed hands. Peace has been attempted. Wars have been fought. Neither side has achieved victory. He looked toward President Hayes. The Keth Dominion is not a fleet. It is an empire. He zoomed the map farther out. The Crimson Territory seemed endless. They possess industry, shipyards, colonies, academies, generations who have known nothing but war. General Hale quietly spoke. So, defeating one fleet changes nothing. The speaker nodded. Correct. You may destroy a fleet. You may liberate a system. You may even win a campaign. He paused. But defeating a civilization is something else entirely. The weight of those words settled over the chamber. Mercer found himself looking back toward the projection. The war that threatened humanity was not coming because of hatred. It was coming because another civilization had decided Earth no longer deserved to exist. That made it far more terrifying. Ambassador Lyra finally broke the silence. She looked toward President Hayes. When I first arrived on Earth, I admired how quickly your people built ships. A faint smile touched her lips. Today, I believe I understand something more important. Hayes looked at her. You built hope faster than fear. The Sylvan ambassador looked around the assembly. Do not lose that. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the speaker nodded in agreement. The assembly has welcomed many civilizations. He looked directly at the Terran delegation. Few have reminded us why we continue to fight. The chamber was quiet once more. Not with despair, with resolve. And for the first time since entering the assembly hall, humanity understood that it had not merely joined an alliance, it had inherited a responsibility.